Hello and welcome. All right. We're going to get things started here in 2 minutes. I'm excited to have you join. What I always like to know is where people are from. So while you're logging in and we're waiting for others to join, if you wouldn't mind typing into the chat feature where you are sitting, what location, where your home is. I know we've got some East Coast, some West Coast, so I'd love to hear where everyone's from. Type into the chat feature, please. So as you're typing into the chat feature and we're finding out where everyone's from, I wanted to kind of lay the groundwork for how this works. We're really excited that you're here and you're joining us. This is the highly anticipated return of EVRYMAN Live, which is our monthly webinar program. My name is Dr. Abigail Rue, and we will be engaging in this format on the third Wednesday of every month at the same time, 1 o'clock Eastern, all the way to 10 a.m. Pacific. If you're curious, I live in Austin, Texas, so I'm at the 12 o'clock Central Standard Zone. I will serve as your host for these informal yet informative conversations with experts. I like to think of them as like a perfect coffee date, a titillating conversation with someone that you find engaging and inspiring. So we're going to get started in a second. It's exciting to see we've got people from Nashville, Kentucky, Georgia, Toronto, North Carolina. Thanks for filling in on the chat feature where you live. So whether you're a member of the EVRYMAN community and have been for a long time, or you're tuning in for the first time, we welcome you. Our EVRYMAN lives are intended to be open to the public. They're open to females, and they're open for your involvement. So let me explain how they're going to work. What we're going to have you do is listen for the first portion. I will introduce our guest, and then I will ask probing questions so we can gather successes and failures of our guest expert, insights and expertise. If you have questions for our guest, which I hope you do, please use the Q&A feature on Zoom. So you can type your questions in at any time throughout this webinar. And at the end of our time together, about the last 10, 12 minutes, I will read your questions off to our guest so that he can have some impromptu answers. So here's what to expect. You will not be surprised by being asked to break out into a group. You will not even have your camera turned on. So you are welcome to munch down on your lunch. Your dog can bark, your cat can cross the screen. We will be none the wiser if you're wearing your PJs. This is a chance for you to listen and be inspired by an expert. And I hope to ask some great questions of the ones that you provide. So to kick off the 2025 EVRYMAN Live, it seemed appropriate that we should bring as our special guest feature the new CEO of EVRYMAN, Judson Kauffman. I want to tell you a little bit about Judson Kauffman. He is a father and a fisherman. He is a veteran and an entrepreneur. Judson spent 10 years in the Navy, starting as a Navy SEAL. He served as a sniper and a team leader on 3 different combat missions in the Middle East, which earned him multiple decorations and valor distinction. After this time in the Navy, he switched to businesses, and many of his businesses have been successful, but not all of them. For example, one of his successful businesses was Desert Door Distillery, which he co-founded. Desert Door is a near zero waste organic distillery that established an entirely new category of spirits and was named #1 craft distillery in the nation by USA Today. From distilleries, Judson moved to looking at the ocean floors. He co-founded TerraDepth, which is an ocean exploration and data management company, and it was named one of the most innovative startups in the nation by TechCrunch. Now, Judson has switched from distilleries to ocean floor exploration to being the CEO of EVRYMAN. He is serving his life's purpose to help others find fulfillment and maximize their positive impact in the world. He spends his full time on this mission, and he earned his master's in business from the University of Texas, where he was given the Future Legends Award by the Texas Business Hall of Fame for all of these successes. In addition to all of these professional accolades, Judson is a dedicated family man. He has 4 young children who he enjoys spending all of his free time with, and often they can be found free diving, fly fishing, reading, traveling, or serving others together. So very excited that you are our special first guest, Judson Kauffman. We appreciate your time. Let's get started.
Thank you, Abigail. Thanks for the wonderful introduction, and thanks for taking the initiative to bring back Everyman Live. I'm happy and humbled to be here and pumped to see some familiar names there in the guest list. So thanks everybody for joining.
So Judson, you've taken on this new role as CEO of Everyman, and this is not a company you stumble into. So I want to know, what inspired you to get involved in men's wellness and emotional growth? Was it a defining moment that occurred to you, or was it over a long term? What got you here?
Yeah, I would say it wasn't really the emotional growth that brought me here that kind of got me excited about this mission. It really is the spiritual growth. However, the emotional growth is what unlocks the spiritual domain, which for most of my life was not accessible, not attractive. I didn't care. Um, there's a very long story. I'll make it as short as I possibly can. Yeah, there were a few defining moments. The first one is pretty dark, but now I'm grateful for that difficult dark moment because it was the, as so often is the case with human beings, right? Those dark moments are the things that wake you up. So for me, it was 2018. Went out one night and celebrated a business success with some buddies. Came home after more alcohol than anyone should consume, which was typical for me at the time. It's typical for a lot of business people I know, or a lot of veterans I know. The next morning, I woke up and I could hear my only 2 children at the time. I have 4 now, but I could hear them down the hall. One was probably 3 or 4. The other was a newborn. My wife was making breakfast, and I did not want to go and be with them. I was just down, and I went into the bathroom, started the shower, and then went over to the mirror, and I couldn't hold my own gaze in the mirror. I was filled up with this sense of shame, and so I quickly hopped into the shower and tried to shake it off, but I couldn't. And within a minute or two, I was sitting down under the water in the shower and I was sobbing. And I probably hadn't cried since I was a little boy, except for maybe funerals here or there, squeaking out some tears. So that was kind of the first wake up call that I was at this very, very low point. I started to consider taking my own life. I thought, well, why not take a look at that as an option? This life just sucks. I hate myself. I'm ashamed of my things that happened in the military, ashamed of the man that I've become. I'm not the man I want to be. But thankfully, I ruled out suicide. I entertained it for, probably over a year. And at that point, there was only one other option, and that was transformation. And so I kind of raised my hand to some people that I knew, and I said, look, I need help. I don't know what to do. The playbook I've been running has brought me success externally. I've checked every box on my checklist, but I'm not enjoying life whatsoever. So that began this years long journey. On that path, I had lots of mentors and guides. One of them asked me a critical question that became the next kind of defining moment that got me here to Everyman. And I hired this coach to help me figure out what my path was in life. At the time I was the CEO at TerraDepth. It was going gangbusters. We just, gotten a contract with the U.S. Navy with our new submarine technology. My best friend was a co-founder. It was great, but it just didn't feel like my path. I'd started to feel really good about life. And he said, well, what do you think is the greatest injustice in the world? Maybe that will lead you to figure out what your path is and find a clearer sense of purpose. It took me a few months to answer that question. I had a list of things on that list of injustices that all sounded pretty compelling. But one of them kept popping up as number one, and that was the fact that so many people were living the way that I had been living, which is some form or fashion of less than truly happy or less than truly fulfilled. And I think it stuck for me because of my intimacy with military service and intimacy with the history of sacrifice that's gone into creating a society that we were all lucky enough to be born into. Um, and yet, less than 20% of us report as being very happy. And that's an injustice to me. And so I said, I'm going to fight for that injustice, but I still didn't know how. Um, I stayed on the path of sort of personal inquiry, personal development. A few months later, I went on this hike, a beautiful day, and I was just so grateful for the turnaround that my mentors and guides and coaches had helped me experience. And on that hike, I was crying tears of joy and gratitude. And it was the opposite of how I'd felt years before when the journey began. And I sat down on this rock and it was windy and I had this big view of the hills. And I was just as thankful and grateful as I've ever been in my life. And at that moment, like a friggin' bolt of lightning or a light switch going off, I had this epiphany that I was going to spend the rest of my life working however I possibly could to help other people um, through the same journey that folks had helped me on, because it's just been so fulfilling, so incredible. And I think very few people experience that side of life. And it's not just about folks who are depressed. It's about people who may be, just a little bit empty or a little bit unfulfilled or like, yeah, life's pretty good. It's like, no, if you think life is just pretty good, you've missed it and there's work to do. And I want to help you do that. So I resigned the day after that hike as the CEO of Terra Depth. Started the coaching practice, started doing some speaking, and then not long after met the team at Everyman, and they said, "We're looking for a guy with your skill set, your passion. Come join the team." I said, "Yes." So here we are.
Thank you for sharing. What a journey. So here you are. How has this emotional journey shaped the way you're leading Everyman?
Yeah, in my 20s and early 30s, both military experience, business experience, I really wanted, my ego really wanted and needed to be seen as a competent leader. And so I would often violate my own integrity or my own authenticity to try to show up, let's say, in a business meeting a certain way that I thought um, would make me look good or look smart. And then going on this journey, which began, I mentioned spiritual earlier, but it does begin with the emotional. And for me, I always try to be like John Wayne and not have emotions. But in this journey, I realized that I could not become the man I wanted to be unless I went there, unless I tried to tune into my emotional state and understand, that part of me. And so I had some help doing that. And in that journey, I slayed those demons, which are sort of these riddles that we have to solve in order to understand our emotions. And part of that required me to analyze the self-loathing and analyze my negative behavioral patterns, like my addictions, and how I escape certain situations. And all of that is learned behavior from, when we're kids. And so the journey forces us to explore that. And when you explore that in your childhood and how these experiences, whether you had a charmed childhood like me or not, whether you had a severely traumatic childhood, all of it is worth analyzing. And so what you learn is self-compassion, um, because the mistakes that you've made largely are results of behavioral patterns that you learned as a result of whatever environment you were in as a kid. So now you separate yourself from your behaviors, and the emotions are your guideposts to be able to make that separation. And so when that happened, I was able to forgive myself for all the things that, brought me shame and guilt. And when I forgave myself, my ego's need to be seen as something special or different from what I actually was evaporated. And then I went back to work. I was still the CEO at Teradep, and I remember walking into the space, and I had just had, you know, a very healthy relationship with my ego, and kind of put it in the back seat, and was sort of leading with my heart and my spiritual self, still competent, not a basket case, but I could feel people gravitating to me in a way that I'd always really tried, and now I wasn't trying at all. I was just being me, and I was being met with the reception, the respect, and the love that I always wanted. And so I try to remember here at Everyman, and wherever I lead, to just lead as me, authentically and vulnerably. And um, my ego is still there. It's still strong. It still has those behavior patterns that I learned. But every day I try to remind myself of that. And I think the outcome is, the team that I work with trusts me, and they're not afraid to say, Judd, that's a stupid idea, or that was a mistake. We should change it. And so, because I've made those changes and been fortunate enough to kind of get to this place, I think it helps the broader team because we can make quick decisions on how to redirect and how to fix problems.
Thank you for sharing. So you've told us how you got into this work, and you've told us how you lead at Everyman. What is your vision for the company? And I promise this interview is not all going to be about Everyman, but I just want to kind of end the Everyman questions with this. What do you believe are your short-term and long-term visions? Some people listening have been part of the Everyman community for a long time. This is their first chance to log in. So what do you envision happening in the Everyman world, short-term and long-term?
Yeah, I think long term, everybody who's been on the journey at Everyman, certainly prior to me and now, I think all probably at least intuitively share the same vision, which is to help as many men as possible live a fulfilling, joyful life. That's the long term vision. Um, Short term, a little more, tactically, um, we want to be we want to get really, really good at the handful of products and services that we're providing. We want to get organized, focused, and cultivate trust with the people who come to us. Because when folks come to us in order to do the work they want to do, no matter where they are on their journey, they have to trust us. That's the most important thing. Um, so just continuing to expose weaknesses we have internally, expose, for ourselves where we might be limiting ourselves when it comes to trust with each other and cohesion internally, but also externally. Um, Everyman is right now, it's a community of men, and we do retreats in person. We do virtual men's groups, which are awesome, and we do online curriculum. So it's just continuing to do that and bring it to as many men as possible while maintaining our integrity.
One of your passions, as I understand, and one of the first new experiences that Everyman is rolling out revolves around rite of passage, turning boys into men, or at least recognizing that this should be an honored moment. Tell us about why you care about rite of passage and how do you think it should be handled? And then, what is Everyman doing?
Yeah. Well, one of the challenges facing males worldwide, primarily in the United States, is this sense of not being valued. And so we've got 25-year-olds, 30-year-olds, 40-year-olds living with mom and dad, living in a cyber reality, video games, social media, and their only like socialization away, aside from video games, is podcasts. And we have these incels, and we just have these guys who feel like nobody wants them, nobody needs them. And to be fair to them, they've been receiving that message from many of our social and political leaders, which is why this past election, to some extent, turned out the way that it did. But one thing we're missing of many things is an understanding of where we fit into society and why. And the deepest issue, the singular, I think, most important issue, or the root issue with men, is this lack of connection to their authentic identity. I saw some military folks' names popping up. Good to see some of those names, guys I haven't seen physically in a very long time. But if you're in the military, you understand that boot camp changes your psyche. It's because it's a rites of passage ceremony. You come in thinking about yourself, defining yourself one way. You graduate defining yourself in another way. Weddings are designed to be a rites of passage ceremony. They're psychological stage gates that shift the way you understand who you are. And every culture that you can read about in history had rites of passage for their kids when they entered the puberty stage. Because when that stage begins, and you, as that human being, you start to notice your body's changing, your voice is changing. You know internally that childhood is over, but also know that you're not yet a man. So you're in this in between stage. There is no clear delineation from modern American society to that child that, hey, you're no longer a child. If we can bring this in, if we can establish an accessible, approachable, non-religious, but spiritual, anybody from any spiritual background, religious background should be able to participate in a modernized American boys' rites of passage and girls too. But that's not our jam at Everyman, obviously. Um, what will happen is these boys, and I've seen it firsthand, I've facilitated rites of passage before. These boys say goodbye to childhood. They start to see themselves in a new way. They start to really understand that they're becoming a man. And the rites of passage ceremonies that we do, we bring in the father figures from that boy's life. And when the boy goes off into the woods, we work with the dads. The boy comes back, the dads and our facilitation staff says, welcome to manhood with love and compassion and wisdom. And so it just shifts the boy's maturity. It puts him into this more focused path towards becoming a productive uh, and fulfilled and joyful and self-confident member of our society. And he's going to be excited to leave mom and dad's house when he's 18.
I like this. And I like how you mentioned that you don't, you believe women should have a rite of passage ceremony as well. That's not every man's mission, but it does make me question, what is the role of women? Here I am working for Every Man, hosting this webinar, but every person on this call, including yourself, has lots of females in their life, their mothers, their spouses, their children, their sisters, their daughters. What do you feel, or is there a place for the females in this relationship with the males who we're serving?
Yeah, I mean that's half the battle is women, and I think for example, when we bring a boy and his father in for the rites of passage ceremony, we bring the mother in as well. She gets trained on how to receive her boy when he comes home because she has to understand your little baby is not a little baby anymore. And you need to change the way that you speak to him. You need to change the way you understand his presence in your life. Um, I think that we sort of, as a society, had this social experiment of like extreme sensitivity, and you can call it the woke movement. And it's really interesting to sort of analyze it and things like the Me Too movement, where it began, I think, with women with reasonable complaints about men who had just crossed a line that should never be crossed. But then it became a trend. And it became such a trend that your average guy who respects women and is a good human being was told he was a misogynist or sexist or racist, right? Expanded beyond gender issues. Um, and it got out of hand. And so I've started to see some female leaders saying, enough is enough. We need to bring traditional masculinity back. And we need to accept that a lot of guys, not every man, but a lot of guys like to do things like go hunting, play sports. They might not smell good. Maybe they like to get drunk every now and then with their buddies. Maybe they like to fight. Letting boys be boys in school, allowing for play fighting on the playground, allowing for rambunctiousness in school. And women have to stand up for this because for a long time, the last 10, 15 years with this movement, post Me Too and the woke movement, I think a lot of women, have some responsibility with how we dropped the ball. Men do too. We share that responsibility. And so I think bringing it back to a reasonable course of action where we're, you know, accepting reality for what it is on both men and women.
Thank you for that. You've mentioned, some scholarly work, your rite of passage interest, what guys are doing. And I'm just wondering if I'm an audience member and I want to dive deeper, who are your go-to references, scholars, researchers, podcasts, books? If you just have, what if I were to walk around your office and look on your shelves, what would I see? And who do you think, oh yeah, these are the people that have informed my way of thinking?
Yeah, I like the question. I kind of went overboard when I started to be interested in this kind of thing. And again, I was in a really dark place, and so I needed a lot of help. And part of what I did was just I bought a ton of books, and I was obsessed with reading. Mostly, I read philosophy and wisdom books, but also a lot of psychology, a few books on neuroscience, neurobiology, and then two books on physics, one of which I still haven't finished because it's hard. So for me, what I was just personally drawn to was um, the ancient wisdom, ancient philosophy. And I grew up in a Christian household, but with my experiences in Iraq, I abandoned Christianity and religion altogether, became an atheist. But then on my journey, I had multiple spiritual experiences that I can only describe as some connection to a power, a higher power that we can't explain. And the best word for it is God. And when I read about descriptions of God from people like Buddha or Jesus or Thoreau for that matter, or Einstein for that matter, it matches my experience. And so I lost my attachment to atheism but still I wasn't ready to come back into Christianity. So I started with the Hindu and Buddhist texts and Taoist texts, so Lao Tzu. And then I finally read the Sermon on the Mount. And I'd fallen in love with all three of those philosophies, Taoism, Buddhism, and Hinduism. There's so much overlap. And then when I finally read, Christ's Sermon on the Mount, I recognized all of these teachers are saying the same stuff. All the lessons are the same. The most important pieces are the same. Um, and it's all truth. It's all truth. So those are my top philosophical teachers. I also love Socrates and Aristotle. So read them. Joseph Campbell, who's a more modern philosopher and mythologist who is the brains behind the Star Wars storyline because his deep understanding of the human psyche and mythology and storytelling. Um, and then Claire Graves, who was sort of an understudy to Abraham Maslow, who came up with Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Claire Graves took that theory a step further in something called spiral dynamics that has been very impactful for me. Another tough read, but the concept is pretty basic. It's essentially an extension of Maslow's hierarchy of needs and how the human consciousness can evolve or devolve over time, which is it's why my grandfather never would have thought about making time or space for spiritual practice because he was just concerned about paying the bills. He was living month to month as a farmer and a rancher, but he afforded me the opportunity to go on these long hikes and try to connect with God, and live the way that I'm living. And so my grandchildren hopefully can take that ball even further, and do more good and bring more peace and joy to the world.
Thanks for your reading list. I've got a few more questions for you, but I want to encourage our listeners to make sure that you're using the Q&A tab different from the chat feature. So the chat feature, we welcome your thoughts, your feedback when something inspires you, share with the group. But if you want your question answered after my last questions, please post them in the Q&A tab so that I can collect them all there and make sure that I ask. I did see one question posed, how old are you, Judson? No one can believe you've done as much as you've done, and I don't think you should ever tell. But keep posting your questions in the Q&A. So a few more questions from me, and then we'll get to the audience after they post their questions. I want to know, what does success look like for you? And you've spoken to what it might not look like in this lack of authentic life you used to live. So I'm not just speaking about the CEO hood, but I want to know, as a person who wants to balance his emotional and social and professional life, how do you know when you're doing it? How do you know when you're on your path of fulfillment and striking the right balance?
Yeah. Success as is normally defined in American society and the pursuit of it, that's what led me to near suicide. And so I have revisited how I define success for myself. And for me, it's simply staying connected to my spirit and allowing that to guide me on my path. If I can do that, I won't violate my integrity. I won't let my ego get back in the driver's seat. And even if I fail, economically or fail in business, um, I know that I'm on the right path, and those failures become opportunities for growth and learning that I'm grateful for. So that is how I try to remind myself to be successful. And I wish I didn't have to remind myself, but I do, and that's how I think about it.
Thank you. That's a healthy response to a shift in what success meant to you and means to you now. I've got one last question about Everyman, and then one last question for you. My last question for Everyman: if you could have Everyman leave one legacy in the world, what would it be?
Legacy is sort of a weird concept. Um, I think it's Taoist philosophy about legacy that those who try to build it destroy it, and those who simply try to serve others create lasting impact. And so I think it's an awesome way to look at it. Like, and the ultimate sort of legacy for every man, the ultimate success is that we drive ourselves out of business because demand evaporates, because it's not a need anymore. I don't think that's likely anytime soon. Um, but in sort of a perfect world, that is the desired outcome, is that we don't have to create, special opportunities for men or women um, to grow. Hopefully it just becomes part of how we teach our children, to be tuned in emotionally so that they can be tuned in spiritually, so that they can be human beings of high integrity who understand what love is and understand what courage is and how courage is different from bravery, and strive for both. So that's how I think about it.
Thank you. That's very aspirational. And a final question for you before I turn it to the many questions that are being populated on our Q&A feature. Continue to do so, please. If I'm listening, and this is my first time hearing about you, Judson Kauffman, it's my first time hearing about Everyman, I'm brand new to this. What is the most important thing I should do? Man specifically, or men and women, or maybe continue doing, if my goal is to lead my best life? What's my actionable item that I can take away from this webinar that I can implement fairly easily and fairly immediately?
Yeah. Don't take it from me, take it from a couple of philosophers. First is Socrates. And if you even had a, tiny lesson on Socrates, maybe you remember it. He's really kind of known for one thing, which is he cared most about know thyself. Like, that's the quote associated with Socrates. Know thyself. But what's interesting is the same emphasis on the same concept pops up with all the philosophers I mentioned earlier. Jesus One of his great quotes is, "The kingdom of God is within you." Um, I think Carl Jung said something like, those who explore externally, um, they become smarter. Those who explore internally become enlightened. Um, you see it in Buddhism as well, and you see it in Hinduism, just this emphasis on self-inquiry, 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 like get to know who you are. This is the most important thing you can do. And that's why everyone was so emphatic about it. And I'll explain a little bit on what happens when you do that. And I talked about it earlier. When you start to analyze your inner world and say, well, why did I behave that way? Why do I feel anxiety in these kinds of situations? What am I truly afraid of? What motivates me? And going as deeply as you can when you answer those questions will tell you everything that you need to know. One of my favorite Joseph Campbell quotes is, "The cave you feared to enter holds the treasure that you seek." Most of us are so distracted by devices or work, we don't know what cave we fear to enter because we don't spend any time analyzing who we are inside. We spend all of our time just playing and being distracted, or like me, working or getting drunk or whatever. Self-inquiry is the path. It is the way. Whether you give a shit about religion or not, whether you care about spirituality or not, whether you're depressed or not, even if you're 99% joyful and happy, the remaining 1%, the path is self-awareness because it'll lead you to understand how your ego is getting in your way of showing up as yourself for others. It prevents you from serving the world. And when you really light up is when you find a way to serve the world. And you can't find that if you're stuck in a device or you're escaping the pain of whatever negative emotions have been accumulating for your entire life. So that's it.
Know yourself.
Yeah.
Get to know, seek to know yourself. Thank you.
Yeah.
I see there's been some people posting questions on the chat. I'm not going to read those because it gets cluttered with some of the comments, and I like your comments, but go ahead and post your questions on the Q&A feature. So I'm going to start with our last, 10 or so minutes, pulling some questions that have been posed by those who are here live.
Hmm.
How does Everyman instill integrity into events when participants come in with lifelong destructive behaviors and interact with the community of others who are living in integrity? How would you answer that?
Yeah. The facilitators have all experienced a life of negative behaviors and are intimately familiar with what that feels like and what that looks like and what makes our events successful for the members, for the participants who come, is that when they show up, they truly do feel a very high degree of trust. So how do our facilitators do that? Well, they start by being vulnerable themselves. So they share their stories with no ego, and they make sure that everyone's sense of psychological safety is maxed out. And for some guys, it takes no time at all. For some guys, it might take 24 hours. For some guys, it's not till the third day when they finally feel safe enough to say whatever deep, dark secret is just weighing on them. And some guys don't even know what that deep, dark secret may be. They just know that something's missing, or they feel like there's room for improvement. They don't really know how. It's almost always attached to something negative inside. So by helping the men feel seen, feel safe, feel heard, they can begin to mine that. They can begin to dig a little bit. Um, and sometimes, guys need a break. And so we'll have a facilitator take them outside on a walk and say, hey, it's getting heavy, it's getting hard. We'll ease off a little bit and try again in a few hours. Um, and it's as simple as that. Feeling safe, feeling seen, feeling heard, and having some structure around it. And it works. It's worked forever. It still works.
Thank you. This question comes from another person who's interested in our activities. This person says, I've been fortunate enough to attend online EVRYMAN Foundations. That's one of our program online classes, and course, another advanced course. How do you see those evolving going forward? So maybe you can speak of the phases, the changes, how do you know you go from one to another?
Yeah. Well, we encourage men to determine for themselves where they are on their journey. We're certainly here to help through asking hopefully good, thoughtful, loving, compassionate, hard questions. Um, if you've taken fundamentals, you know that it's really all about self-awareness, like we talked about, through the body. And the belief there, very strongly held belief with lots of research to back it up, is that your body holds quite a bit of wisdom for you. You feel your emotions in your body. Um, and so it is about deepening that connection. But when you get to a point where you feel like at any given moment you can stop and tune in and name an emotion, which is incredible for most guys. It took me years to get to that point. The question is, well, what's next? So we've developed that, and we used for our inspiration several models for what does the overarching journey look like for a man, and it begins with that self-awareness and sort of somatic awareness. Um, but guys want to keep going, and how far can you go? Where's the end? Well, that's been answered by a few cultures, a few teachers historically. The Buddhists have their eightfold path, which is pretty structured. Like, here's the steps you take to become enlightened. Joseph Campbell has the hero's journey, which is a similar sort of architecture for how an individual human being can kind of follow a structured path to get to fulfillment or to get to the top of Maslow's pyramid, a hierarchy of needs of self-actualization and then self-transcendence. So we've taken a handful of those models, some of them ancient, some of them more modern, and because we've all fumbled through the dark for so many years, we being the facilitation staff and the leadership team, we said, how do we make it simple for guys? Can we give them something that is not so dizzying? Like, I bought 200 books on this stuff, and like that's ridiculous. So the whole point was, how do we help men save time when they hear the whisper or they feel the feeling that they got to change and they show up at every man's doorstep? We don't want to overwhelm them with, here's 200 books you got to read. We got a very simple structure, and it's fundamentals to start, and then two follow-on courses. Each one takes you deeper and further on their journey. So it's fundamentals, then elevations, then horizons. And you can start with horizons. Maybe you show up at EVRYMAN and you've been, a pastor for 30 years and you get most of it. And maybe you lost your way. You can start at any point. And we have, 3 retreats, one at kind of at each level, and no prerequisites for any of that.
Thanks.
That's the
Thanks for
question.
explaining the phases. Couple more questions from our audience. Here's one. I want EVRYMAN to grow. I've faced a bunch of not now guys who don't really want to check out. So what are scripts or strategies that you would recommend when I want to invite men into this men's work of self-improvement? How do you get others on board?
Yeah, I think each individual is a little bit different, but there's a fairly short list of motivations. And I think asking them questions about their motivations, make it about them talking to you as opposed to you trying to sell them on it. And then just pull that thread. What do you want in life? Do you feel like you've got everything that you want? At some point, they're going to say no. And you say, well, how do you think you could get that? And they say, I don't know. Maybe some, deep soul searching, maybe with some structured support. Yeah, it sounds good. Well, come to an everyman event. Like, this is what they do. Maybe try that approach. This seems to work. It's worked for me.
Great. This is more pointed for those who are familiar or not with EVRYMAN. Another organization that is somewhat similar is called Mankind Project. So this question is, how do you contrast EVRYMAN and Mankind Project? Both have a similar goal of helping men, but what do you think the difference is, CEO of EVRYMAN?
Yeah, yeah. I love Mankind Project. A lot of men who are close to me have been transformed through Mankind. So I have nothing bad to say about that organization, but I will say, matter of factly, we are different. Mankind is very much, I think, in the lane of sort of the mytho-poetic, sort of tribalistic, um, more spiritual side of things. Whereas Everyman, we're just trying to be like the Ford F-150 for man's path to fulfillment. We honor that, and certainly we leverage and have learned from a lot of the ancient spiritual traditions, as I've mentioned. But we don't think that that's what most guys or the guys who come to Everyman are necessarily looking for. So we nod to it, but it's not the look and feel and style we take it. We take a sort of modern, for the masses approach in terms of style and inspiration and language, if that makes sense.
This is a question that I think would be better served for you typing, but I wanted to honor it. People liked the list of books that you've read, and they want you to, but rather than you speak them and everybody type, how about afterwards you can type it into the chat and we can save that in a recording. But people want to remember more in order of impact the books you've read. Okay, we've got time for just a couple more questions. So I apologize if I didn't get to all of them. I tried to speak fast, but I can't get there. But let me get at least these last two. They're different. This listener resonated with your story of depression and suicide and crying in the shower. Like you, this listener is on the other side, but they want to know how every man can help further this person grow as a man, specifically as it relates to being married and being a better husband. Does every man speak to those kinds of relationships?
Yeah, great question. Thanks for bringing it up. We organize a man's self-growth, self-inquiry in five categories. Think about these as like your personal gauges on your dashboard. And we call it the Everyman Peers model. It's an acronym, PIERS. P is for physical. That's just your body and your brain. So you can look at your physical health. Are you obese? Are you anorexic? Or, are you whatever? That's P. I is intellectual. So what's your relationship with your ego? And also sort of how healthy are you intellectually? Are you using your intellect in an optimal way? E is emotional, which we've talked about. R is relational. And this is what you're asking about. That is how you interact with other human beings in your life. And the S is spiritual. So we look at all five categories and help a man understand where his gauges may be low or high, which guides him on his unique and individual path. It's like, oh man, my R is low, my relational is weak. Okay, we're going to bring you tools, resources to help you bring that gauge up to as close to full as possible.
Good. So it's one of the core pillars.
Yes.
Last question that I'm going to take from the group chat, and then I'll give you a chance to give your final words. This one goes back to your rite of passage and your interest and passion in young boys. I happen to know of your 4 children, 2 are boys and 2 are girls. So the question is, what do you think are the different ways fathers or parents should parent differently their boys, their sons from their daughters, if any?
Mm. Yeah. I don't have a strong answer to that. I don't know that there is much of a difference. I mean, I certainly showed up differently when my daughters were born versus when my boys were born. There are different expectations of society, which I think many of those are warranted. I'm a believer that most men strive to be and are appreciated for being protectors and providers. I think the newer generation, our generation, also needs men with emotional depth on top of that. I recognize there are many men that don't resonate with protector provider, and that's fine. We honor and support those men and how they define themselves. But certainly a majority of men identify with provide and protect, and we add connect, provide, protect, connect. Women are more naturally tuned into their emotional self, which is why you hear so often about women's intuition. Our emotions and intuition are both connected, and exist in our subconscious. So I think helping boys understand there's a time and place for it, but it is necessary to begin to tune into your emotions. There's lots of programming out there that tells boys like that told me you should be more like John Wayne, or you should be stoic and you should be tough. And I think that's great. However, if you're that way all the time, you're setting yourself up for failure as a boy. Boys need to understand how and when to connect with their emotions because there's wisdom there. And it also opens up their intuition, which is the most powerful, as Steve Jobs said, and as I've learned myself, like your intuition is the most powerful tool that you have as a human being. And in America, we lead with intellect and we think intuition and emotion are secondary. So, I think about boys, that's where I spend most of my, more of my emphasis as a father is teaching, my sons how to lean into that more. Um, so food for thought, but we can circle back at a future time. There's a lot there.
So as a former professor, I know the ever need of an audience, your class, to start putting their books in their backpacks as they get close to the end of class. So we are always going to end well within the hour. Before I get to my final comments and let the audience know where to go from here and what to expect, I want to give you one final opportunity to give any words, advice, inspiration, thoughts. Thank you for your time, Judson, but what are your final thoughts to our audience?
Hmm. Well, when I think about why I'm here, I think it's very similar to probably why most people show up in their work. There's hopefully some deeply held attachment or love of this society. And no matter where you land on the political spectrum, you can point to lots of things you think are wrong with our society. Much of that is simply due to a lack of courage and leadership. And so my sort of call to action is to tune into your courage. And when you see something that you know is hurtful or wrong, do something about it. There's a great quote about how evil triumphs because good men do nothing. And I think we've seen for a while more good men doing nothing than we deserve as a country. So that's it.
Thank you. Judson, I really am grateful for your time. You've been vulnerable, you've been courageous, you've been articulate, and you've been inspiring. Thank you. Thank you for being here as our relaunch of Everyman Live and being our first guest. And we're delighted that you opened up. My hope is now everyone is much more informed about who Judson Kauffman is. Hopefully you're inspired by his words and you're informed about the company that he's at the helm at. My audience, thank you for attending. Thank you for being present. Thank you for typing in the chat. Thank you for posting your questions. And I want to tell you what's next. So we plan to do these once a month at the same time. The next one, I can give you a little plug, will be February 19th at the same time. So 1 o'clock Eastern, I'm Austin, Texas. So it's 12 o'clock for me, 10 a.m. Pacific. And we've secured Dr. Miles Spar as our guest. Dr. Miles is one of the nation's leaders in optimizing male health. He focuses on overcoming chronic illness. So he's a medical doctor who does lots of advisory boards and has written a book, and he's really inspiring to listen to as well. So I do want you to join us. But between now and then, we have plenty of things to get you involved with Everyman. You can go onto our website, everyman.com, learn about our upcoming retreats that are in person on the weekend, learn about our online classes, and learn about other member events that are happening. So it's been a pleasure having you all. I'm delighted that you enjoyed and engaged with us. Again, I'm Dr. Abigail Rue signing off. It was a pleasure being with you. Bye-bye, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.